So I stand before you on this first night of 5,781, on this new day of this very new year. And I want to start first with a very powerful text that I came across many, many years ago. It's a book. It's called Fate Did Not Let Me Go. There's actually a DVD that has a short documentary about it. And I read it, and it's one of many ethical wills that were generated during the Holocaust, during the Shoah. And yet there's something about it, I keep coming back to it every time I open and I look, and there's a connection. A letter, it's a letter that was sent from a woman to her son. She is in Czechoslovakia. She's going to be going to Theresienstadt. She sends it to her son, and it doesn't get to him for many, many years. What catches my attention immediately is that it was actually sent on my birthday on August 24th, but in 1942. And then on top of it, the story, back up to tell the story of what it is. Valerie Ohlendorf sends this letter, and she is sending it just before she goes to the Theresienstadt concentration camp. And there she dies 2 months later. The letter ended up in South America with her grandson, Stephen Ohlendorf. It's his grandmother's aunt. It ends up in South America with Aunt Ella. When Aunt Ella passes away, they find this letter in her effects, in her records, and then it is sent to Stephen Ohlendorf's father, who is still alive at that point when he is 79. It's written in German. They get it translated into English. The family holds on to it for many, many years. There was only a few members of the family and a few friends knew about this letter until Stephen Ohlendorf's father passes away. They went to the rabbi. The rabbi agreed to use it in the eulogy. Now here's the part that then caught my attention more than just being written on my birthday. The rabbi that did this was Rabbi Jack Benprad. Rabbi Jack Benprad was the rabbi for my parents as they were growing up in Dallas, Texas. He was a rabbi. He had come from Italy. My father was telling me about this afternoon, and was very close friends with my paternal grandfather. The number of links, the number of moments that connected it somehow, that my story got woven into this story, was so incredible. And so it was then shared as part of the eulogy, and then it went on to become a book. The book is called Fate Did Not Let Me Go, and I want to just read the last paragraph. The fact that I could not be a witness to your life in America was much more sad for me than you believed, my boy. All your letters born by a deep child's love called to me to you, and the joy of seeing you again, the echo of the longing, and the possibility of living with you made me try to do everything necessary to come to you. If I did not write so often for all my longing for you, it was done from love to you, because I believed it was better from you. Also, Jade, I repeat to you, and I know that you'll understand, I was and am daily happy, even longing very much for you in your life. However, she writes, fate did not let me go. It was a necessity for Aunt Ella and I to think that it will console you. I wish it so very much. Now, my beloved boy, she writes, I will take my leave from you. I will thank you 1,000 times for all the love, for all the gratitude, for all the joy and sunshine which you brought into your father's and my life, starting from the day of your birth. May the memory of your parents' house and your childhood shine like a bright and lucky star over you, my beloved, good and precious boy. Valerie wrote that. She sent it on, and it didn't find her way to his sons for over 40 decades. It's so incredible. It did find its way to him through just the magic of coincidence, the miracle, call it all kinds of different things. And you see that, and part of you says, I know I felt a little jealous. How amazing would it be for you to open up records and sent from one relative to another and find something like that? This letter that's full of this wisdom and this insight into the family and the history and the story to pass on to your children, to create that incredible bond across time and space. Generations connected to generations beyond simple memories. Thinking about that. And even in the midst of preparations for these high holidays, with another coincidence of time and space, I happened to actually ask my father for a sermon. All of these years that I have been in Vero Beach here at Temple Beth Shalom, I've never given one of my dad's sermons. We have talked about sermons, we have passed resources back and forth, but I've never said, Dad, you remember that sermon? Can I have it, please? This year, for the first time, I don't know if it was gumption, I don't know if it was curiosity. For some reason, I said, Dad, there's one sermon from one high holidays I remember. My father is an amazing speaker, just an incredible rabbi with his wisdom and sweetness. And I remember all of those high holidays, the way he gave us inspiration and uplift. But there was one sermon and one particular moment in a sermon that I remember, and it wasn't the wisdom that he shared or the idea. What I remember was being a teenager, sitting there with my brother and sitting there with my mom and hearing my dad talking about Stephen and I, and then on top of that, declaring that his first grandchild was going to be Sarah and addressing Sarah, his future grandchild. The sermon was called Sarah Dearest, and that always stuck with me. I was sitting there, I remember Stephen and I nudging each other back and forth about, wait, what is that? Wait, who, what? How did he get to name our children? He sent me that sermon. Beyond that memory of a teenager, I didn't really remember all of the details. And I received it just a few weeks ago from my dad, and he sent me the PDF, and it's incredible because it was written on a word processor, and it's got his handwritten notes on it. And the more I looked at the sermon, the more I thought about Fate Did Not Let Me Go. The more I looked at the sermon, I realized how amazing, how incredible, how this was the year to ask for this sermon. My dad offered it in 1991, 29 years ago. I would have been 17, the very age my children are now. Anna's 19, Adina's about to turn 18, she's 17, Nathaniel's 14. My own kids are right there in that same age when I was sitting there with my parents. My kids have never heard this sermon before, and I heard it 29 years ago and not since. And I share part of it with you tonight, but not just because of the wisdom that's in it, like Fate Did Not Let Me Go. There is something more powerful in this sermon, the power of generations, the power of love that transcends time and space. So this, I share with you my dad's excerpts from my dad's sermon from 29 years ago, and I'm going to try to do this without crying too much. This is my father. As I stand before you tonight on this Rosh Hashanah Eve, my thoughts harken back to a particular afternoon in rural Mississippi almost 15 years ago. I have never written or spoken about that afternoon because my thoughts about it were so personal and because I didn't think anyone else would really care or understand. But time is a way of changing things, and I have begun to wonder if, even though it's a story I have never used, it's a story that has perhaps directed me through much of my rabbinate and my parenthood. It took place in a little town in southern Mississippi by the name of Petal. I was called there, as I often was from my congregation in Jackson, to officiate at the funeral of one of the town's prominent citizens who was Jewish. Like so many others, his parents had settled in Petal decades before, and he'd done his best to keep the family store afloat. He had also done his best to keep his Judaism alive. But that was not easy. Isolated from the larger Jewish community, his children had grown out of the faith, and a handful of other Jews who had once lived in Petal had either died or moved away. So there we stood on that afternoon at the side of his grave, together with his friends and children, burying a Jew in a ceremony no one else related to or understood. It was probably the loneliest feeling I've ever had in my 20 years as a rabbi. The feeling that comes from knowing that you have to say Kaddish alone for the last Jew in town and the last of his family line. It seemed inconceivable to me that this could happen, that this death of Judaism could be so complete and so final. And because I did not want to believe it, my thoughts suddenly turned to the next generation, and an idea occurred to me. What if I took money I received as an honorarium from the funeral and used it to buy 2 Tanachim, 2 Bibles, one for each of my sons, who were then young children? What if I recorded in each the events of that afternoon along with my own sense of loss, and then asked my sons to do something if they could, to read the story once a year at Rosh HaShanah, and then try to bring up Jewish children who could say Kaddish for those that they loved? I'm reading this sermon, and I'm thinking to myself, wait, Dad never gave us a Tanakh. We never got a Hebrew Bible. I don't remember hearing this story and being asked to tell it year by year. And I'm also thinking, wait, I've been a rabbi for 18 years. My dad is standing in the same spot, and here I am, a rabbi with my congregation looking back across time and space. So I was stumped for a minute because I didn't quite, I knew I hadn't missed something, I don't think. Then I read the next paragraph. I dismissed this idea rather quickly because I felt like it might place an unfair burden on my sons. It probably wouldn't have, Dad. We would have gotten it through just fine. But the yearning and the hope of that afternoon stayed with me all of these years because it symbolized so much more than the death of one Jew or the sadness of one funeral. It symbolized what Rosh Hashanah is all about, my dad wrote, the perpetuation of life itself as we experience the rebirth of time, the perpetuation of Judaism and of our own personal values from generation to generation. And most of all, a reminder of the treasure that our children and our grandchildren and nephews and nieces and even our children yet unborn represent in the preservation of everything we hold dear. For it is on this night that we assign value to our lives in the greater scheme of things and reflection on what our lives mean. And we cannot know that our lives mean until we step back at a time like this and reflect on those things that are precious to us, that we would want to leave them as a legacy for this next generation. That last line, and leave them as a legacy for the next generation. When my dad gave this sermon, can't imagine that he was looking out, watching Stephen and I, and envisioning me and Stephen and us and our families and our wives and our kids, much less me, a rabbi, 29 years later, standing in a bima, not that far from Tampa, and here, reading his sermon, giving his sermon with children that very age. His legacy that he talked about in that sermon, mirror upon mirror upon mirror, reflection upon reflection, bringing me into this spot, into this time and space. I skipped to the end because I mentioned my father talking about his future grandchildren, and this really struck. He wrote, "Then I would add a few thoughts more, not only to my sons, but to my mythical, not yet existent granddaughter, who I shall name Sarah, whom I hope one day to bounce on my lap. To her, I would write, Sarah, dearest, learn to have fun and never take yourself too seriously, but also take time to confront yourself, to comfort yourself, and remember what you're all about. Make decisions as best you can, but don't berate yourself if you choose the wrong course, because none of us has a crystal ball. We also never have more than a 50-50 chance at anything. Love your brothers and sisters and be there for them, especially after your parents are gone, because it's every parent's dying wish. And because despite the quarrels, sometimes family can only count on family. It is always another side to the story. Remember to walk in somebody else's shoes and give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Gain pleasure from little things as much from the great. Because, and this is one of those lines, my father has said this line in so many sermons and I've heard it, to read it was also incredible. In the final analysis, it's the little things that make up life. Drive carefully, lock doors, and be careful. And don't worry if you can't fulfill all of the above. I couldn't, so why should you? All I ask is that you try. And then every year on my yard site, Dana Hora, on Mea Ve'esrim, Dad, say Kaddish and get together with the family and have a big festive dinner and tell funny stories about my mishigas and my idiosyncrasies. And finally this, every year before Rosh HaShanah, take out this letter and read it. Use it as a guide by which to measure your fulfillment in the past year and to set your goals for the next. Remember me as you read it. And remember your people Israel. Remember that God always gives you another chance. Out of that reassurance, know that as long as you have hope, there will always be hope. Until the next year at this time, L'Shana Tova Tikatevu, may you be inscribed for another year in the book of life, your loving grandfather. It's incredible as I read this, the first time I read it, and my father gives those instructions in the sermon and then never passed the sermon on to us. And yet here, because I remembered him naming Sarah, I asked for it, and now I get to fulfill a wish that he probably doesn't even realize he made 29 years ago. I share that sermon with you, much like that letter from Fate Did Not Let Me Go. This sermon, this letter, this statement of my dad's love and values, it is something I will truly treasure. All of us, don't all of us dream on finding something like that? Something eloquent and timeless and personal. It's my dad's hopes and dreams for my brother and I, and for all of his grandchildren. And as I read it, I also remember sitting there knowing that he wasn't just talking to my mom and to Stephen and I, he was talking to his whole congregation, being the loving rabbi that he is. And it wasn't just the wisdom. It was his love and his care, his ruach and koach, his spirit and energy that came through in that sermon. And now as I share it, kept coming back to us, lifting us up, and in this moment fills me up even more so. It was a sermon, and I'm reading it now, but it's such, as I read it, it's my dad. It's a hug and his smile and his love. It's just not just wisdom. Like this letter of Fate Did Not Let Me Go. And as they talk about it and what it meant to the family to have that connection, this sermon for me is so much more. Now, I share that with you and hope, part of me hopes that all of you now are ready for a Raiders of the Lost Ark type quest, that you're going to go searching for hidden gems, scouring attics and looking in safety deposit boxes and writing to relatives. And by the way, Marlis is an amazing genealogist and can help you connect with all kinds of stuff. You might be tempted, as you see here, Fate Did Not Let Me Go, and we'll be doing a book study of Endless Time that's a similar story, and I've got this sermon. You're going to be looking into hidden recesses, hoping to discover something like this, something that's this kind of awesome and transcending time and space. And I say that on this Rosh Hashanah, on this Shabbat, and I would love for all of us to be successful in that endeavor. I would hope all of us find something that moves us and cracks us up and just fills us with the holy. But I will also tell you that search and that quest is not really my main directive tonight. For just as I have that sermon to share with my children and future grandchildren, and I am not going to name them for my children, there was a different story, another story that I came across, a story of generations that carried the same value and had that same connection and that same awe and transcendence, and yet you don't have to go out and find we'll read it on Yom Kippur, that the Torah is not across the sea or not in heaven. There is something that we can do that has that same effect. It's a Moth Radio story. There's a beautiful podcast called the Moth Radio Hour, and it's people that just tell stories. One of the stories that I have heard is from Andrea King Collier. She got married. She and her husband worked very hard and had this incredible life together, and they had 2 children. Their daughter had her life together. She followed the script Andrea talks about. She got her dream job after going to her dream school, and she married her dream husband, and she had a dream baby, and then she quit the dream job to take care of the dream baby. She did it all. She lived according to the script, their hopes and dreams for her. But their son, not so much. He lived in the basement. And they did everything from hoping that he would win the lottery and get out of the basement, that he would find a job and get out of the basement, to marrying someone and getting out of the basement. He was aimless. He couldn't get him to motivate and to work and to get on the script their daughter had, until one day he disappeared. And they weren't sure where he was, and they were very concerned. They weren't sure what was going on, until one day he calls and he says, "Mama, I need to come over. I need to show you something." And she's not sure what's going on. The dad says, "Well, it's not going to be a long wait. He's parking outside." And he comes and he says, "Mom, we're going to have a baby." And she looks at her son and says, "Wait, what?" And the story unfolds piece by piece. He obviously has his girlfriend. His girlfriend is pregnant. His parents had no idea. And there they are, his girlfriend and him, and very pregnant, and the baby. They had the baby the day before he comes to tell his mother about the girlfriend, are sitting there in the car. Now, Andrea hears this. She and her husband have colds, so they don't want to give it to the baby. And so they kind of go, and the son and the girlfriend and the baby go away. Eventually, they come back. And she has spent these days and weeks between trying to wrap her mind around that her son went away for a little while and comes back with a girlfriend and a baby. Her grandchild. This is her grandchild. A few weeks later, she's able to hold her grandchild, Miles, for the first time. And this is what struck me as I listened to that, having read that sermon from my dad, talking about him bouncing his grandchildren on his knee, because there she is holding Miles, bouncing him on her knee, looking at him, trying to figure out and thinking about her grandparents, thinking about her parents, trying to figure all this out. How does she do all of this? And then she remembered a line from Toni Morrison. The line is simple. When the child walks into the room, does your face light up? And she remembers the first time she heard it, her children at that point were teenagers. And you just have to listen to the recording of her telling the story, because she points out that teenagers, and their sometimes moodiness and grumpiness and anxiety and panic and hormones and all of that, very few people will light up all the time when their teenagers walk into the room. And she remembered thinking about that, and then she remembered the second part of what Toni Morrison said. She said, "It's not how you feel about them. It's not that your face lights up, because when they walk in the room, they're such wonderful people, or they're such lovely people, or such gracious people, or kindness, but not because you don't light up because your child is the perfect child. Rather," Toni Morrison said, and Andrea took this to heart, holding Miles in her hand. She remembered this moment, that you light up for them. You don't light up because of who your children are. You light up with light and with love because of who you are and what you want to give them. You start the interaction when they come into the room. You start it by giving them that smile, that love, lighting up to give them the love that they need. It's just like that sense of crossing time and space. I can see her having that moment, holding that baby, having that line from Toni Morrison, "Do you light up when your child comes into your room?" And she just lit up because she's like, "Here, I have this baby. I'm going to give him all my light and love." Tonight, I share with you these very, some level, disparate stories. One is the story of a Holocaust artifact that brought light to that family. One is a sermon from my dad that was him thinking about pondering his future, even as he talked about the Rosh HaShanah 29 years ago. And the third is a grandmother holding her grandson for the first time, wondering how this whole family was going to fit together and work. But as I stand before you on this Rosh Hashanah, I have to ask, aren't they all the same? In every story, over and over again, one generation reaches out with love and with light. Or another feeling, one reaches out and the other feels it. Love and light coming across time and space, being inspired to share it, to amplify it, to reflect it, and to refract it. And so here, on this Rosh Hashanah, I share each of those moments of connection, of light and love. I share these stories with you because in this day and age, when disaster seems to be at every turn, when there is so much brokenness raining down upon us each and every day, I felt power. The way in each of these stories, the way that was just subtle and awesome, each one showed the power of emotion that we can send forth through connections between generation and community. And so on this Rosh Hashanah, when we say L'Shana Tova, when we greet each other, whether it's our friends, whether it's our family, whether it's just people in our community, when we are wishing each other a happy new year, I ask that you fill it with something more, that it is up to us as we think about the lighting up when someone comes into the room, to find a way to hear when people offer us these moments of connection. For us, whether you're giving a sermon or just going through the checkout line, to do these acts where someone feels connected, they feel that light and love, to be inspired this year, to fill ourselves and our world, whether it's everyday acts or in the high places along the way, with this kind of love. May we find these connections. May we make these connections, past and present and future, connected by the best smile, by the best hug, by the best of our light and love. Ken Yiratzon, be that God's will. Amen.